Okay, good morning, guys. Happy Monday. This week we're going to work on two different skills. The first skill that we're going to work on is learning how illustrations and words work together to help the reader better understand the text. Later in the week, we're going to take these two texts and we're going to start comparing and contrasting. So here's our learning target. I can use specific information from the illustrations and words about characters, setting, and or plot to demonstrate my comprehension of a text. Okay, and then here it is a little more broken down. I can use details from the pictures and the words about character, setting, and plot to show my understanding of a text. Okay, so this skill kind of reminds me of, when you're watching TV and you see something really awesome and you want to show somebody else and you're sitting in the room and you're like, oh, mom, you got to come see this. You got to come look at this. And your mom's like, I can hear it. And you're like, no, you have to see it. You have to see it. So that kind of makes me think about this skill. Today, I want to remind you that readers notice how the illustrations and words work together. Readers can study how the words relate to the images and ask themselves, how do the illustrations and words work together to help me better understand the characters? This matters because when readers pay close attention to pictures and words, then they better understand the characters in a story. I have this little sidebar here for using illustrations and words to understand characters, and the little steps say, number one, stop and study pictures and words. I think this is really the most important thing, guys, is just stopping and taking the time to look at the pictures and really think about what the words are saying and how the two things connect. And then asking, how do they work together to help me better understand the characters? So, what do I know about this character based on what I just saw, what I just read? All right, so here's my notebook. You're going to have your own notebook. You can do this on a piece of paper and then type up your answers in the discussion post if you prefer. If you want to take a picture and upload it, if you want to start a little video note and make a little video note and just read off what you wrote, that's fine too. So this is my notebook, and I wrote the goal at the top: focus on how the pictures and words help me describe the characters. Because remember, the bottom line here is that we want to be able to use the pictures to help us and use the words to help us really understand who the characters are, what do they like, what do we know about them. Here's our text. This is the traditional version of Cinderella. As we go later in the week, we're going to read another version, and we're going to kind of look at both of them and talk about how they're the same and how they're different. There once was an honest gentleman who took for his second wife the proudest lady in the land. She had two equally haughty daughters, while he himself had a most kind and beautiful young girl. Sadly, the man became ill and died not long after the wedding. Wasting no time, his wicked wife assigned his good daughter all the chores of the house. While her girls rested in lavish chambers hung with mirrors, her stepdaughter was sent to sleep on an old straw mattress in a dirty attic. And when the girl's daily work was done, she would collapse, exhausted in the chimney corner along the cinders. Cinderella, her wicked stepsisters nicknamed her, but she paid no heed to their scorn. One day, Cinderella headed through a nearby wood, whistling on her way home from the town market, when her sweet melody was interrupted by the mournful chirping of a bird. Before her, she saw an injured bluebird on the ground, and she knelt down, carefully examining its lame wing. But in the next instant, Cinderella was startled by a man's voice calling out. Raising her head, she gasped, for heading toward her was the king's son, seated on a gallant horse. She could not imagine what a noble would ask of such a girl such as her. Nevertheless, she spoke up bravely. Have you lost your way, good sir? The handsome gentleman smiled at her. Perhaps, for I wandered away from my horsemen while distracted by the sight of a fair creature. As was I, Cinderella replied, stroking the small animal in her hand, never imagining that he may have been speaking to her of her. But the poor thing is hurt. I feared that you were ill when I saw your huddled figure in the distance, the prince continued, but you are well. Suddenly ashamed of her humble appearance, Cinderella thanked the prince for his concern and hastily gathered her bags. "I must be home now, for the bird needs immediate attention," she explained, quickly disappearing into the woods. It happened that soon the king's son hosted a series of balls, and Cinderella's two stepsisters were invited to attend. They were very proud and happy, but forever fussed about what they would wear to the gala. Cinderella gave them the best advice she could and offered to dress them and arrange their hair herself. While she was combing out the elder's hair, the ill-natured girl said, "Cinderella, do you not wish you were going to the ball?" "Madame," she began, for they always made her address them in this way, you know that it is not my fortune to have any such pleasure." "Yes, people would laugh to see a filthy little cinder girl at a royal ball," the sister replied, and despite those heartless words, Cinderella continued to brush her stepsister's hair until it was perfectly even and smooth. But after a coach had whisked the sisters away to the regal affair, she sat down by the kitchen fire and cried. Tonight it would be her sisters who would see the prince, not Cinderella. She had not said a word about meeting the prince in the wood, but often thought of it. In her dreams she did not rush off ashamedly, but instead rode with him to his castle, never to return to her cruel home. The girl's sobs quieted when she heard a bird chirping at the window ledge. "Why, you look just like a bird whose wing I nursed not long ago," she said with wonder, and before her very eyes the bird, so small and delicate, turned into a fairy godmother. "There's no need to cry, my dear," the woman said gently. "Oh," Cinderella gasped, you wish to go to the ball to see the prince, isn't it so?" Cinderella nodded with astonishment, still unable to speak. "Well, since you did a great kindness for me, now I shall do a kindness for you. First, run into the garden and fetch me the largest pumpkin you can find." Cinderella did not understand how a pumpkin could help her, but neither did she understand how a bird could become a fairy godmother, so without question she obeyed. The fairy drew out her magic wand and struck the pumpkin lightly. It blossomed into a splendid gilt coach, lined with rose-pink satin. Cinderella's eyes sparkled with awe. "Now fetch me the mouse traps out of the pantry, my dear." Ever more excited, Cinderella rushed to bring it to her. The fairy lifted up the wire door, and as each mouse ran out, she struck it and changed it into a beautiful horse. The fairy turned to her astonished godchild. "But what shall I do for your coachman, Cinderella?" "I saw 2 rats in the rat trap," she suggested, "and they might welcome a more pleasant fate." "You are right. Go and look for them." When they were found, the fairy made them into the most respectable coachman, with the finest whiskers imaginable. Afterward, she took 6 lizards from behind the well and changed them into 6 footmen, all in dashing uniforms, who immediately jumped up behind the carriage, as if they had been footmen all their days. "Well, Cinderella, now you can go to the ball," announced the fairy. "And I shall see the prince," the girl sang, but wilted when she looked down on her ragged frock. Before Cinderella could say a word, her godmother laughed and then touched her with the wand. Instantly her threadbare jacket became heavy with gold and jewels, and her coarsely woven petticoat lengthened into a gown of sweeping satin. From underneath peeped out her little feet, covered with silk stockings and the prettiest glass slippers in the world. "Now, Cinderella," said the fairy godmother, "you may go, but remember, if you stay 1 instant after the last stroke of midnight, your carriage will become a pumpkin, your coachman rats, your horses mice, and your footmen lizards, while you yourself will appear just as humble as you did before." Radiant, Cinderella made her promise and climbed into her grand coach, which dashed off into the night. At the palace, the prince warmly greeted his guests as they milled about the ballroom. But when Cinderella walked in, he could see no one else. The dazzled crowd stood aside to let her pass, and they whispered to one another, "Oh, how beautiful she is!" The most fashionable ladies planned to have identical garments made the very next day. The prince offered Cinderella his hand and led her out to dance. She moved so gracefully that he admired her even more. He thought her face familiar, but how could such an extraordinary lady exist in his kingdom without his knowledge? When he could stand it no longer, he asked her if they had been introduced before. I'm afraid not, sir, she replied, and fearing he might remember the cinder girl in the wood, went off with a deep curtsy to seek out her sisters. She chatted cheerfully with them at supper, and they relished the attention of so magnificent a lady, for they did not recognize her in her finery. Okay, so this story had some beautiful illustrations. Here's something I learned about Cinderella through reading the text and looking at the pictures. So when I was looking at page 4, I noticed something right away, how the prince was dressed compared to how Cinderella was dressed. And I noticed that he was in this like really nice green suit, and it was like lined with gold. And then when I looked at Cinderella's dress, it was very simple and very plain. So this kind of goes with some of the words. In the text, it said Cinderella was suddenly ashamed of her humble appearance. So I was thinking, Cinderella did not like the way that she was dressed in front of the prince. Ashamed, to be ashamed means to be embarrassed. So usually the word humble is used in like a good way if you're humble, but in this text, that they actually use the word humble appearance as it being something like she looked simple, whereas the others dressed, fancy. Unlike her sister, Cinderella wears simple dresses and works around the home. So that was just one spot in the text where I noticed the pictures and the words kind of giving me some information about Cinderella. So now here's your turn, and what can you tell about Cinderella from the words and the pictures here? So jot, while you're doing your jot, I want you to jot 2 things you learned about Cinderella using the pictures and the words. I want one of them to come from this particular spot in the text. The other one can be anywhere throughout the text. I do want one of them to come from this spot. So your goal is to focus on how the pictures and the words help me describe the characters. So as you respond, I want you to say, in the text, I noticed this, or in the pictures, I noticed this, and that should be in your answer. And it can be anything that you could tell about Cinderella, even her relationship to her stepsisters. Okay, you can either leave a video note or you can leave like a discussion comment in the actual discussion post, or you can take a picture of your notebook, whatever works for you.